coming up.
This committee has bona fide concerns that CBSA's top brass is covering up and deliberately trying to hide their actions while scapegoating others. Are you prepared right here and right now, sir, Mr. Moore, to confirm once and for all that it was Min Doan who ultimately made the decision to go with GC Strategies? Yes or no?
Marianne Reza, a deputy ADM of PSPC, to provide that exemption. And in the letter, you said that we have found a supplier that has the modern technology to offer. I mean, I'm not going to go on quoting it, but you did not seem to know who the supplier was.
To quote Macbeth, it seems like there's something rotten in Denmark. This government states that in 2014, CBSA began the design and implementation of the CARM project, and the CARM project is a $526 million
point of order,
contract.
Mr. Seebeck, I'll stop the clock. Mr. Point of order.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Sorry, I think. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And again, I don't mean to interrupt my my honourable colleague's train of thought, but I just wanted to know the relevance here.
Well, let me ask you this, because we're now aware that 76% of contractors who did actually no work on this, that billed the CBSA. We know there's record of shredded documents that is well known and been shared with Canadians. And again, the Auditor General said there were weak financial controls and record keeping when it came to your work. So as a CFO, do you think that a third-party forensic audit of ArriveCan is necessary based on what you now know and the points I just raised?
So what is going on at the CBSA to allow these highly irregular and suspicious contracting practices with Christian Firth and Darren Anthony of Government of Canada Strategies?
So as I've said before, that is not permitted under the rules and regulations. And but
it happened.
It happened, and so
who was responsible for that?
That's what the investigation is considering.
Surely, sir, you must have some suspicion. Were you personally involved in allowing GC to do that?
I was not involved in GC Strategies at all.
Are you prepared to name names, sir? Are you preparing to speak truth to power?
This guy's garage. Like and subscribe.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, gentlemen. Thank you for your attendance today. My focus will largely be with you, Mr. Moore, and I mean no disrespect when I say this, but I'm not interested in lessons learned. I'm interested in how we got here and the issues that are really concerning to Canadians. There seems to be a culture of hiding information, threatening those that come forward, reprisals, and a general lack of accountability from senior leadership at CBSA. This committee has bona fide concerns that CBSA's top brass is covering up and deliberately trying to hide their actions while scapegoating others. There are now over 12 investigations taking place because of this debacle. My time is limited. I'm going to be asking for straightforward and honest responses, please. Mr. Moore, we've seen the ArriveCan briefing packages that went to Ms. O'Gorman. Your name is all over these documents, as is Min Doan and Kelly Belanger. This committee has been lied to by current and former senior CBSA leadership, particularly Mr. Doan, Ms. Belanger, and former President Mr. Osowski. I expect you to tell us the truth today. Will you agree to that, sir?
Thank you for the question. I hope that everyone tells the truth and answers your questions to the best of their ability.
Thank you.
I will certainly do that.
Thank you. So the biggest question that we need to put a final point on without deliberating any further is who at CBSA was responsible for the decision to choose GC Strategies, also known as Government of Canada Strategies. We've had evidence from Cameron MacDonald on 2 occasions confirming that. Mr. Antonio Utano confirming that it was Min Doan. We also have what was really telling is a public document, an ATIP response from CBSA, which confirms in Annex A of the document that, and I'm going to read this out, who made the decision to contract GC? My office. This is in reference to Min Doan's office and Kelly Belanger's office. Same office. My office made the decision to pursue the contract with GC Strategies. The two proposals for the work were presented to the CIO and president, and the decision was made to proceed with GC Strategies as their proposal and approach aligned what the CBSA was looking for, particularly rapid staff augmentation. The Deloitte proposal was a managed service using their cloud instance. This would have involved additional risk and did not align with our decision to build cloud mob competencies with the agencies. Are you prepared right here and right now, sir, Mr. Moore, to confirm once and for all that it was Min Doan who ultimately made the decision to go with GC Strategies? Yes or no?
So I'd like to provide some additional clarification for the committee. So there were two decisions here. The first decision was how the ArriveCan app would be developed. That decision was a staff augmentation decision. The decision was to keep this in-house in order to develop the app and use staff augmentation to bring in the technical services required. The other option was the managed service approach, which is the Deloitte option. It was decided at that time by the executive committee that the managed services option would not be appropriate because it was unclear what the statement of work would be from the Public Health Agency of Canada.
Sir, this is all evidence we've already heard. I don't need you to waste valuable time that I have to repeat that. I'm sure you've been following the committee and you know what the evidence has already led. Will you confirm with me right now, at this point in time, that Min Doan was charged with the responsibility of choosing Government of Canada strategies?
So I can confirm once the staff augmentation model was agreed, the ISTB branch was responsible for putting in place the resources required, whether those be resources from...
And was that Min Doan, sir, yes or no? Was that Min Doan?
He was the Vice President of the Information Science and Technology.
Was that Min Doan, sir, yes or no?
He was the Vice President, and it was a decision made by...
And the Vice President at that time was Min Doan, correct?
That is correct.
Why did you have a difficult time saying that?
Because he is the Vice President.
Right.
All the documentation has been signed.
End of discussion. You've now confirmed, as many people have confirmed, that it was Min Doan. Min Doan repeatedly lied to this committee, saying he didn't personally make that decision, his team did. So I'm very glad for your honesty, and we can clarify that and move on.
But I think
now, this was, sir, I asked the questions. This was such a political hot potato for the government that the Minister of Public Safety at the time, Marco Mendicino, had significant concerns with Government of Canada strategies, particularly with the millions of dollars received. And we now know that they receive upwards to $19 million for their involvement in this particular boondoggle. Now, we know that Mr. McDonald, Cameron McDonald, was threatened by Min Doan on October 28, 2022. There was a phone call. He was told that the public safety minister at the time, Marco Mendicino, was unhappy with the ArriveCan media coverage and wanted someone's head on a platter. He was worried that either he or you, sir, Jonathan Moore, were going to get fired, so he was talking about someone's head on a platter. Is that my time?
That is your time, sir.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Moore, perhaps you can get back to replying the next round. Mr. Sousa, please go ahead for 6.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Moore, did we ever have a contract? Does it even exist? A company by the name of Government of Canada Strategies? Is that such a? Is there a company by that name?
There is a company by that name, and we have in the ArriveCan there was 4 separate contracts in the name of GC Strategies.
But what are they called? Is the name Government of Canada?
Point of order.
Or is it
Point
called
of order,
GC
Mr. Chair.
Strategies?
Sorry, I'll pause your time, Mr. Sousa. Your point of order, Mr. Brock?
Yes, Chair. Mr. Sousa is deliberately misleading the evidence. We've already got confirmation from Christian Firth that GC Strategies, GC stands for Government of Canada. That came right from Christian Firth.
Latitude.
Yeah. Continue, Mr. Sousa. You've got 5.5 minutes.
I appreciate it. I just want to get clarity if, in fact, the company is called GC Strategies or, in fact, it's called something else. And I don't believe there is a contract with any name by the name of Government of Canada Strategy. It doesn't exist.
Sorry.
I'm sorry, Mr. Moore, is that correct?
I can confirm that all of the contracts are in the name of GC Strategies.
Fair enough.
Thank you, Chair. Going back, Mr. Moore, to my last question before I ran out of time, the conversation between Min Doan and Cameron MacDonald in October of 2022, that Marco Mendocino was so unhappy with the media attention to ArriveCan that he wanted someone's head on a platter, and that either Min Doan would be fired or you, sir, would be fired. He made specific reference to that. Then he turned and said that, you know, Cam, if I have to, I'm going to tell the committee that it was you. So he threatened Cam MacDonald. That threat was then relayed up the chain of command. Ultimately, it was communicated to Aaron O'Gorman. And to your knowledge, sir, do you know if anyone, particularly Min Doan, was suspended or reprimanded for that threat? Yes or no?
So I think I could start with the comment made by the Minister. I'm not aware of that comment. I've never come across it. In fact, I've never briefed the Minister at that time, and I was not informed.
Min Doan confirmed the conversation took place. All right, so we can move on from that. Do you know if Min Doan was reprimanded for his threat to Cameron MacDonald? Yes or no?
No, I do not, but I understand that this investigation is ongoing.
Have you had any discussions with any of your ministers responsible for the portfolio during the ArriveCan rollout? That would include Mendocino, that would include Blair, and that would include LeBlanc. Have you had any personal discussions with any of your ministers?
So personally, I have briefed the ministers in terms of the SUPS-B and SUPS-C package in 2022, and also in terms of the announcement in the budget 2022 of the 25 million.
Did you update any of the ministers with respect to the overruns with the ArriveCan app?
No, because of those briefings, it was a briefing about the supplementary estimates to prepare them for committee.
Were you aware of any other senior executive who would have had those discussions? For instance, the president, the deputy minister, or Gorman and Ossowski. Would they have had those discussions with those three ministers with respect to the cost overruns?
I'm not aware, but I can't comment on for my president.
Okay. You heard reference to the award that you received for the ArriveCan, which really begs the question, why was the award given in light of the Auditor General's report and the Procurement Ombudsman report? Can you actually provide us with documentation, sir, as to how the three individuals identified at CBSA received those awards? Were there nominations, things of that nature? Can you provide that to the committee within 3 weeks?
So again, I'm not aware of those awards, and so I'll have to come back to you on that.
Okay. We heard last week from PSPC that three additional companies that received taxpayer monies and should not have received those taxpayer monies are being now investigated by the RCMP. Those three companies were not identified by the PSPC because of privacy concerns. Are you familiar with those three companies in question, sir?
I am not familiar with those companies. However, I have been informed by PSPC that the CBSA is involved in this, and our involvement is limited to $15,000.
The CBSA is involved in relation to the three companies?
So I'm informed that the individuals who have been identified as fraudulently making claims, some of those claims relate to us. I think there are 36 different departments affected.
Right.
CBSA is affected up to $15,000.
Okay. And that was in relation to their supposed work on the ArriveCan app?
It's not necessarily in relation to the work on ArriveCan app.
But it could?
In relation to anything else.
But it could?
I'm not aware of the PSPC. I think you'd have to address that to
Okay.
PSPC.
To your knowledge, sir, are there any other companies that are operating under suspicious circumstances with their contracting at CBSA, either under the ArriveCan app or other work done at the request of CBSA that are being considered for RCMP referrals?
So I'm not aware of any at the moment, but as I've said before, we are now looking through all of the interactions to see if there are any examples. So, for example, we have done a review of our contractors who are working and whether they are included in the GEDS system, and we have identified a few names there, but I'm pleased to say in all of those cases we have spoken to the other
Thank you.
employer.
Thank you, sir. I have in my hand a multi-page letter addressed to Ariane Reza, the assistant, as she was then was, Assistant Deputy Minister for PSPC, in relation to the request for a national security exception in relation to one company. I'm looking at the third page of this document towards the bottom end of it. And you've indicated we have identified a supplier that has already successfully implemented a modern tool for risk assessments on shipments coming into Canada. That he was once involved with Transport Canada that leveraged technology to build a modern cloud-first approach, low-touch process to replace a manual high-touch process. That company in question is GC Strategies, Government of Canada Strategies. Is that correct?
So I do not believe so, mainly because it refers to shipments. It does not refer to individuals, but perhaps I could ask Mr. Leahy to answer that.
I am afraid that is our time. Perhaps next round you can respond to that.
Mr. Moore, I want to come back to an answer that you gave my colleague with respect to this letter about the national security, as she says, that there were certain rigorous processes that could be exempted. Were you aware of the fact that this was a request?
We're talking about the national security exemption and about the reference to an alternative supplier.
Yeah.
Mike, would you?
So you signed it? I have your signature.
Yeah, no. It was sent by me to PSPC.
Bah écoutez,
Yeah.
Jonathan Moore.
No, it's me. Yes.
So vous avez signé.
You signed. I don't understand why you hesitate. Was this letter at the very origin of the fiasco that cost $80 million for the agency? If this exemption had not been requested, would we be in the position that we're in today?
So the national security exemption was requested by PSPC for them to access the powers at the start of the COVID pandemic. The national security exemption...
Mais c'est vous, Monsieur Moore. Vous avez beau parler.
Yes, but Mr. You can talk about PSPC, but it's your signature and your letter. You asked Ms. Marianne Reza, Deputy ADM of PSPC, to provide that exemption. And in the letter, you said that we have found a supplier that has the modern technology to offer. I mean, I'm not going to go on quoting it, but you did not seem to know who the supplier was.
I think the supplier was about a commercial. It was not about ArriveCan. But Mr. Leahy, who's in the commercial trademark.
Monsieur Moore.
Mr. Moore, you signed it. You are the signatory of the letter. You are saying to the Deputy Minister, the ADM, that there is a modern tool that will be effective, but yet today you can't tell us who that supplier was?
Well, it was an example, but we did not use it.
C'est un exemple.
It's an example, but it's like the examples on the GC Strategies site, Mr. Moore, or where Mr. Firth and Mr. Anthony quoted many officials from the federal government without being able to give us names. And you're doing exactly the same thing. You're citing that you found a supplier. Well, who was the supplier? And why would that serve as an example to justify an exemption from the rigorous procedures of supply of PSPC with respect to an issue that should have cost $80 million but now is in the hundreds of millions? So it's very difficult for me to understand who's responsible here. It's your signature.
I think if you allow Mr. Leahy to speak, he will give you the details.
Only if you have a name. Seulement s'il y a un nom.
Only if you have a name.
As context, the national security exemption
Je
applies.
veux pas de contexte, juste le nom.
I don't want the context, I want the name. Where it's marked XREF Transport. On the last page, we found a supplier that's already put into operation a modern tool, XREF Transport, right beside it. Transport XREF is a system for It's XR company. Well, thank you so much for telling me that it's not complicated. Then I find it very surprising, though, Mr. Moore, that you weren't able to tell us who the supplier was. Mr. Moore, is there someone in the entire GC strategy process who would at any moment raised a red flag to you to say something might be wrong?
Au fur et à mesure des...
During the 176 updates?
No. There was no one was raised a red flag about GC strategies until the committee started its investigation.
Vous êtes le dirigeant...
You are the director of finance for this area. Is that correct? And therefore, are you the one that signs contracts and checks to suppliers?
So I was not personally responsible for ArriveCan. However, as an executive of the CBSA, I do have accountability.
Who is the executive?
I was the CFO at that time.
Yeah.
And I was an executive of the CBSA, and so I take responsibility for the failures which have been identified, and I am also responsible for the improvement plan which we are developing to ensure this does not happen again.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I see that today we actually have some gentlemen at the committee that I'd like to ask some questions about CARM. I see Mr. Leahy there and Mr. Martel, the Director of Procurement. The challenge that I have with CARM is the complete lack of inconsistent statements on when this project began and how much it will cost. To quote Macbeth, it seems like there's something rotten in Denmark. Mr. Gallivan testified at the Trade Committee. This was started in 2010, and it was a $370 million project. In the Gazette Part 2 that just came out on March 13th, 2024, this government states that in 2014, CBSA began the design and implementation of the CARM project, and the CARM project is a $526 million
point of order,
contract.
Mr. Seebeck, I'll stop the clock. Mr. Point of order.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Sorry, I think
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And again, I don't mean to interrupt my my honourable colleague's train of thought, but I just wanted to know the relevance here. This is the ArriveCan study, and we are looking into ArriveCan and not CARM. And so I just kindly would ask my colleague to establish the relevance to the study on ArriveCan. Thank you.
I actually see the relevance, so I'll allow to continue. I think we heard from witnesses that Deloitte, which was running CARM, was messing up CARM and therefore was in the penalty box, which led to us getting GC strategies. So I do appreciate your point, but I do see the link. Go ahead. You've got 4 minutes and 4 seconds.
Point of order, Mr. Chair. That just I do apologize, but that is such a tenuous thread, if I could even call it that. And again, we're here on a constituency week. May I remind the chair to study ArriveCan, and I'd prefer us to focus on ArriveCan. And again, what is the link to CARM? I don't see it, Mr. Chair. I don't see it.
Well, the link is the contracting irregularities that took place in CARM, and therefore Deloitte was allegedly put in the penalty box, which is how we end up with GC strategies. So the link is pretty direct, and exploring how we got to GC strategies through the problems with CARM might illuminate the committee with respect to this study.
I'm fine with that. Go ahead, Mr. Seebeck. You have 4 minutes and 4 seconds.
Thanks very much. So, was this actually a project that started in 2010, as Mr. Gallivan stated, or in 2014, which you published in the Gazette a mere 2 weeks ago?
So maybe if I can just deal with the penalty box. So I'm not aware of anyone saying that Deloitte were in the penalty box. And it is worth, identifying that Deloitte worked on us for a number of other things as well. So myself in the Finance and Corporate Management branch, we'll
be happy to provide that from the ATIPs to the committee, and we'll bring you back to talk about it. But if you could answer my question, which is this a project that started in 2010 or 2014? Because your government is saying two absolutely contradictory things.
I'll ask Mr. Leahy to answer this.
Yeah, so The March 2010 is the first phase of CARM, so that is in the critical path material that was provided at in our trade committee. You'll see that.
So that's AR. So that's AR. Is that ARL?
That is ARL. Yes.
Wait, so that's the subsequent program to CARM.
It is the precursor to, like a revenue ledger is became extended into CARM, but the language in the submission you'll see is both CARM, ARL. It's interchangeable.
Okay, so what I can't understand is the cost. So what we heard from Mr. Gallivan is $370 million, but what we've also heard at committee was that you've spent $438 million. These two things are very inconsistent. But what actually concerns me the most is this. In a transition document prepared for the VP of CBSA on July 31st, 2021, it says the costs are $371.5 million. But interestingly enough, that nothing in the estimates or anything else adds up to that at that time point. And in fact, you sign a contract on October 6, 2021 for $322,125,778. Now, is this contract a result of verbal approvals that were given to Deloitte to do work, and you had to then prepare a new contract with Deloitte?
So maybe I can ask Mr. Lay to respond to the detail, but I think what I will say at the start is the CARM project has been a long-running project. The first two elements of CARM have been delivered. So the agency revenue ledger has been put online.
I know, but that's not answering my question. My question was the cost identified in the transition document to the VP, July 31st, 2021, is $371 million. Nothing in the estimates or supplemental interest adds up to that. But there is a contract on August 6, 2021 for $322,125,778. It appears to me that this is creating a contract to deal with the overruns, because there was a contract for Deloitte in 2018 for $32 million, which now appears to be turned into a $322 million contract a mere 3 years later. Is this the result of verbal authorizations that had to be covered with a new contract?
So again, I'll say we did not come prepared to this committee to answer questions on CARM. We're very happy to bring back the detailed information, unless Mr. Leahy can answer now.
I can say definitively it wasn't based on a verbal contract, if that was the question. So
verbal approvals for work that lead to the necessity of a new contract.
That is not the case. So I think the evidence that we're bringing forward from our trade committee will demonstrate the history and bring clarity, hopefully, to the question you raised about the lineage of this of the contract. So that material is coming forward to committee.
Thank you, Mr. Lay. Thank you, Mr. Seebeck.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Auditor General said in her report that the documentation provided by the CBSA, the financial records and controls were so poor that they were unable to determine the precise cost, and they pegged it at $60 million. That report's been out now for 50 days. Mr. Moore, can you tell us if you've provided any follow-up documentation since this report to the Auditor's Office to further clarify what exactly the cost of ArriveCan was?
Work with the Auditor General on identifying the costs which we had assigned to public health.
I'm going to ask you, sorry, since the report was tabled, have you provided any further clarification from her report about the exact cost of ArriveCan after the report was tabled?
No, we have not provided any further information, but the information we've agreed to provide to this committee, we're very happy to share with the Auditor General.
So it's been 50 days, and your work was frankly shredded by the Auditor General and said the number has not been clarified, can't even get an exact number, and you've not provided anything in 50 days to clear up any of the misperception or actually get a firm number.
Well, as I've said before, I don't think it's possible to get a completely firm number, because in the first year we did not have a separate accounting code. What we did was we used our experts to make their best estimate of how much it would cost. Our best estimate remains $55 million.
Well, let me ask you this, because we're now aware that 76% of contractors who did actually no work on this that billed the CBSA. We know there's record of shredded documents that is well known and been shared with Canadians. And again, the Auditor General said there were weak financial controls and record keeping when it came to your work. So as a CFO, do you think that a third-party forensic audit of ArriveCan is necessary based on what you now know and the points I just raised?
So I think you've raised a number of different points in there. So the procurement ombudsman referred to the 76%. That was actually the question which was previously about sort of who does the work. When you're using staff augmentation, we were checking the individuals had the sufficient qualifications.
But I'm going to ask this at a high level. Of all the facts that I raised and the circumstances and what you know now as the CFO, do you believe that an independent third-party forensic audit is necessary with ArriveCan? We have shredded documents. The Auditor General said there was weak financial records and controls, and the procurement ombudsman report, yes or no? Do you believe that a third-party forensic audit is required here in the circumstance?
I don't think it would add any additional because we've already had a third-party audit in terms of the Auditor General, but also OPPO. What we're acknowledging here is we did not have a cost accounting code in year one. And so it is a judgment how much was being spent on ArriveCan versus other operational activities.
So I think there's many Canadians would disagree and say a forensic audit in this case by a third party is necessary for each of these because the more we learn, the more vague and the more evasive, frankly, many of the witnesses will be on this. But Mr. Moore, I want to ask you about performance bonusing. The executives at CBSA that have been responsible for what happened here with ArriveCan, can you confirm whether they have received bonuses this year or not?
I can't confirm whether they received bonuses this year, as the year is not actually at an end, but I can confirm that during the period under review, I did receive performance payments, but we've already agreed to come back with information of that to the committee.
Going forward then in that case, knowing now with the Auditor General's report now tabled, do you believe executives at CBSA responsible for ArriveCan should get performance bonuses in the future?
Well, I can't comment on that because lots of people are involved in lots of different things.
So you wouldn't rule out, based on what you know and the findings here in the Auditor General's report, the Procurement Ombudsman report, and all the facts that you know, based on how atrocious the financial record keeping was at CBSA, you can't rule out and say now that executives at CBSA that were responsible for this mess should not get a performance bonus going forward now that you know what's in the Auditor General's report.
So I know what's in the Auditor General, and I'm disappointed. So I come back to my previous comment. When we do our financial assurance, we're on average, it's around about 8 or 9% errors. Most of those are not compliance errors, they're administrative errors. In the Auditor General's case, she identified 18%. That is very disappointing, and I recognise that. However, a lot of that is to do with the fact we did not have a cost accounting code at that time. Well,
there's a $60 million error with ArriveCan that Canadians are frustrated with, and again, you're disappointed. I'm going to ask you again, so being by disappointed in the contents of the report and how damning it was about the financial practices and record keeping, you're not going to rule out that executives at CBSA this year are going to get performance bonuses based on what we now know with ArriveCan?
Well, I don't think that's a question I can answer because I do not set performance bonuses. But what I can say is that we're taking action to address all of the recommendations in the Auditor General's report. But I do not agree that it's we don't have the information. There are areas in the information which we are uncertain about, and we had to make estimates.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Mr. Brock, please.
As he then was at the CBSA, who did Min Doan directly report to?
He reported to the President, John Osowski, which is the same for me.
Okay. I'm sure you're familiar with the allegations of Min Doan's deleted tens of thousands of emails over 4 years.
I'm aware.
You're aware of that? When did you first become aware of that, sir?
When it was raised in committee, I was not aware before then.
I'm sorry?
When it was raised here in committee, or I wasn't aware before.
Okay. Would you agree with me, sir, that potentially deleting, not by corrupted means, but deliberately deleting 4 years' worth of relevant emails during the ArriveCan development and outlay would constitute not only a highly suspicious action on behalf of Min Doan, but also potentially illegal under the criminal code? thinking to mind obstruction of justice. Do you believe that that's worthy of an internal investigation?
So the CBSA does take allegations of wrongdoing very, very seriously, and my understanding that that is being looked at.
Is the CBSA investigating that internally, yes or no?
I do not know if they're investigating that specifically, but
Will you look into that, and will you provide us with a response?
I would be happy for the agency to provide a response.
Thank you. Are you aware whether or not that allegation of deleting tens of thousands of emails over 4 years has been reported to the RCMP?
I'm not aware whether it's been reported to the RCMP.
Okay. Now, I want to circle back to Government of Canada strategies. There is a couple of issues that raised in the Auditor General's report. Firstly, you, CBSA, I shouldn't say, not you, CBSA informed the Auditor General during the report stage that GC Strategies was awarded their initial contract on the basis of a proposal that is submitted. CBSA indicated that it had discussions at the time with 3 potential contractors about submitting a proposal to develop the ArriveCan app, yet through investigation, the Auditor General found that only 1 proposal was received by the CBSA and not for Government of Canada strategies. Why would the agency deliberately mislead the Auditor General?
So my understanding is at the start of the pandemic, and again, I was not directly involved in these discussions, that they mocked up what the ArriveCan first version would look like, and they asked 3 organizations, Deloitte, Apple, and GC Strategies.
I'm aware of that. Why would the CBSA deliberately mislead the Auditor General in saying that you received a proposal from Government of Canada strategies when in fact you did not? Why would they deliberately mislead? Yep.
So I'm not aware of that, and I'm sure.
You read the Auditor General report?
Well, I've read the Auditor General's report, but
did you not read that section?
Well, the section there is around GC Strategies was providing people.
No, sir. You, the CBSA, said that GC Strategies provided a proposal. The Auditor General confirmed it did not. So the question is very simple. Why is the CBSA actively misleading the Auditor General in the performance of her role? It really begs to mind the cozy relationship that Government of Canada Strategies has with the CBSA. Second case in point, there was a reference to a $25 million sole source contract going to GC Strategies, and the CBSA invited Government of Canada Strategies to write their own contract. If that's not showing favoritism to GC Strategies, I don't know what is. So what is going on at the CBSA to allow these highly irregular and suspicious contracting practices with Christian Firth and Darren Anthony of Government of Canada Strategies?
So as I've said before, that is not permitted under the rules and regulations. And
but it happened.
It happened, and so...
So who was responsible for that?
That's what the investigation is considering.
Surely, sir, you must have some suspicion. Were you personally involved in allowing GC to do that?
I was not involved in GC Strategies at all.
Are you prepared to name names, sir? Are you preparing to speak truth to power? Are you protecting your president?
I'm not protecting anybody. My understanding is that's all being looked at as part of the investigation.
Who's looking into it?
The investigation and also the RCMP. And
you're talking about Mr. Lafleur? The so-called independent investigator that reports to Ms. O'Gorman?
He is the internal investigator.
Right.
Just like
he's not independent.
And the RCMP are independent, and they're also looking at the
RCMP is independent.
I am not aware of how the status of that. What I am aware of is, it has been longer than our normal standard operating procedures. So our service standards are 120 working days to complete an investigation. It has been longer than that.
I can tell you, Canadian taxpayers are very disappointed in the operations of the CBSA, sir.
That is our time, gentlemen.
Mr. Moore, I want to come back to the letter. This, I feel, is an important part of this whole ArriveCan issue. The letter that you sent to Madame Reza with respect to the exception that should be made for national security. There's no date. When was it written?
It was written, my understanding, on the 1st of June, so I'm sorry that we don't seem to have the date on the letter.
1st June of?
1st of June of 2022. 2020, pardon.
OK, le 1er juin.
June 1, 2020. You seem to, you were ready to answer questions earlier. I have a question. That the supplier was XR when we were looking for it earlier? Yes, I had a meeting with Mr. Utano's team, and they intended to deal with XR, which was a company that had worked for Transport Canada. Who organized the meeting? Mr. Utano's team. Do you know if they had any links with GC Strategy? The two companies, it's marked there, the two companies are together on the agenda. They were noted agenda together. So you found a supplier for modern tools, XR, but it was XR GC Strategy. Can you explain to me exactly what it meant? What exactly? Earlier, you talked to me about GC Strategy. Why? The two, when I look at the invitation that I received in April, the two companies were named on the agenda, XR/GC Strategies. The two names were together. So it was in this letter then that you signed, Mr. Moore, and it was the first time that you saw GC Strategies without naming them. The supplier that you were recommending, that you were quoting in the letter to the minister for PSPC was in actual fact made up of GC Strategies and the aforementioned one.
Aware of that. The letter was provided to me by the individuals who were responsible for preparing it, and as you said, it did not refer to the actual name. That's why I asked Mr. Leahy to answer, because he was aware of the names.
Donc, c'est comme ça.
So that's how then GC Strategy got into the file of ArriveCan.
I would say that for my comment, that reference was not to an individual company which I was aware of, and also it was a reference to a company which was doing commercial goods rather than doing traveller goods, which ArriveCan is about.
Mais pour... Là, je sais qu'il y a une question.
Well, I know it's a matter of interpretation, English and French here, but you are hesitating. You avoided citing the names of these two companies earlier, but now we know that it was an actual joint company and not necessarily bound by shareholders or contracts that was making that presentation. So that was the first time in that letter where you speak of an exemption to be made rather than going through the normal process of procurement. That would be the first time that GC Strategy got into this file, was part of it.
Je pense, Monsieur le Président, il y a eu...
I think, Chair, there were contracts with GC Strategies that had been let before June the 1st. So I think you have to distinguish between justification for sole source, which is often a case for contracts, and the exception for national security, where a given contract would involve agreements, international agreements. So these contracts that were signed for ArriveCan were signed after this exception. No, there were contracts that were let before that, but after the letter. I'm talking about after the letter. Yes, there were contracts that were let after the letter. What proportion of contracts, Mr. Martel? Can you answer that? Well, I can commit to giving you the answer.
It's in writing.
Absolutely.
I'm going to ask you, Mr. Moore, just to comment on the following. Since the information about the ArriveCan has come to light, we've had the RCMP is looking at ArriveCan. We have the Ombudsman Procurement Office that has provided a report on the management gaps around ArriveCan. We've had the Auditor General provide a report around the management gaps, financial gaps, documentation gaps around the ArriveCan. We will be hearing from the Competition Bureau of Canada, as I understand, will be coming here as a witness. We've also asked the Public Sector Integrity Commissioner, as I understand it as well too, to possibly appear and provide testimony or look into this issue. At the same time, there is a CBSA investigation that is ongoing, as we have heard, an internal investigation. At the same time, PSPC already has suspended GC strategies back in November of 2023. I believe CBSA has followed suit as well, suspending, contracts with GC strategies. In March 6th of this year, we understand that PSPC has suspended security status for GC strategies as well too. Can you comment on sort of the what's taking place right now in terms of the investigations and studies that are taking place into ArriveCan? Can you just comment on it? And are we missing something? Is there anything else that we need to be other agencies or bodies that we could bring to bear on this issue?
So I don't feel that we're missing anything. There have been an awful lot of studies. I would put them into two categories. I think, we know that issues arose during the pandemic, and we are grateful for the lessons learned. I think the lessons learned are fairly similar across most of the studies. And as I've said before, we're putting in place a very detailed procurement improvement plan, but also a wider management improvement plan, which includes financial management. I think the second category is wrongdoing. And we are committed. We take allegations of wrongdoing very seriously. We are committed to acting on any founded wrongdoing.